Hello, welcome to this video. Thank you so much for tuning in and sharing in this now moment with myself and with one another. If you haven't seen these videos before, welcome and welcome back if you have. My intention is unity and oneness and the highest levels of love light. I wanted to just do a quick energy update and then go into a flow. One of the messages that's been coming in energetically for me is that, and I've said this a few times, so apologies if I'm being redundant, but it's important, I think, to address. We have a lot of fear that's being dredged up, pulled up to the surface. And fear doesn't necessarily have to represent itself as with the same look. It might not be triggered by the same reason. Everybody has their own reasons for feeling afraid of change, afraid of loss, afraid of the future, fear of not being worthy, fear of losing, fear of abandonment, right? So fear is maybe the set word, but all of the branches that come out from that are really in a heightened state right now. From my perspective, many people are going through a rebirth. And when we go through a rebirth, much of what was, much of what made us feel safe, secure, etc., may not provide for us that same feeling of safety and security anymore. And that's just one piece of the multidimensional iceberg that I am feeling into right now as I share this message. Much of what we are seeing, feeling, and expressing and experiencing is a multidimensional merge from my perspective of timelines, realities, versions of us. Many people are processing things that they never processed, perhaps since they were babies. Maybe there was from the time their mother was pregnant with them, they had womb memories come up. Maybe there was a difficult childhood, or they were abandoned when they were younger. That might be coming up because something has triggered that memory. All of what is held within our cellular memory, from my perspective, is bubbling to the surface for many people. And with that comes much understanding, feelings and emotions, memories, physical as well as obviously beyond. And that brings with it more understanding, more memories, more ahas, more understandings, more feelings and emotions to be then integrated, processed, experienced, understood, or sometimes just let go. And so while each one of us is going through this from one perspective at a different level or layer, so too is the earth. So we are bubbling up with emotions and feelings. And what I'm seeing is these merge of these past things, whether they be realities, whether they be timelines, whether they be experiences in this lifetime. They're coming up again and again and again, and they're being recycled. We can either choose to fall back into that same cycle and relive it in a potential recreation of it, or we can choose to stop and recognize that it is a cycle or pattern that is coming up again, and that we can make the choice not to relive it, or relive it in a different way, in a different pattern than we maybe did previously. We can have different emotions around that experience. We can process things at a different level of awareness that then allows us to re-experience these past memories, these triggers, these stories, these timelines. In essence, create an ability to clear out those old patterns if we should choose to, or clear out some of the distortions that were created in the field because of these previous experiences that are now coming up again, whether it be very strong or a very light reminder or trigger, to then activate within us a fuller potential and ability to really clearly close out those timelines or really clearly integrate those memories, feelings of insecurity, doubt, whatever it might be. And so we're, from my perspective, being called to look at our reality and see what is it that's still creating a sense of fear within me. And I would venture to say that there's a lot of that going around for many reasons. It's not just one reason, because there's not just one event that is happening. There's not just one memory that's being pulled up from our subconscious or being pulled up in our body that is now giving us the opportunity to close that portal, one might say, or to compost it, utilize the energy that's coming up so that we can then compost it into a broader point of view, or gather the nutrients that could still perhaps be available to us that we might have missed the first time around, or recognize that there is no need to continue to repeat this pattern, for this pattern is merely just a pattern that is showing up in my field as an echo of the past that no longer is something that I need or choose to pay attention to send my resources to validate as part of an important, whatever it may be, construct for me. Because at the time when we experienced it the first time around, it may have been important. Now it no longer holds the same relevance because we are no longer needing to experience that again. Sometimes we just need to see that. And that's the aha. That's the ahas that many of us are having, looking back and saying, wow, that was really important. And it was necessary for my growth and my potential. But now I'm in a space where that no longer is something I choose to participate in any longer. And so we might be playing that out in our reality. But just because it's showing up in front of us doesn't mean we have to participate or play with it, should we choose not to. And this is something I think a lot of people are recognizing. And that can also be a little alarming, or not alarming, what's the right word? It can throw us off balance a little bit. All of a sudden we realize, I don't have to do that anymore. But it's been such a big part of who I thought I was that can take us into a type of grieving. We can actually feel sad and not know why. We can feel a little lost because we were used to operating from this particular structure, and that structure no longer holds the same form, no longer holds the same value. So we oftentimes may not know what to go back to. What is our home base? And so there's so many different ways of looking at this. And so I know I'm kind of going into a multitude. This could fill in the blanks from many different perspectives, many different triggers, many different memories, many different realizations are coming up. Well, simultaneously, what I'm being shown is we really are activating at a much higher potential and a much higher rate of charge. I am really being called to express this because the more we can simultaneously process these memories, recognize these triggers, feel our fullness in that moment of our expression, and allow these emotions that are coming up to be integrated, to be cleared, to be, I always say, recognize it. Then once we recognize it, we can reorganize, or we can clear, we can make a more conscious choice in that moment of how we are then going to interact with this new fill in the blanks person in our lives, circumstance in our lives, reality that's showing up for us, a habit pattern that maybe isn't new, it's old, but now it's showing up for us and we're a different person. So we see it and it holds a different charge for us than it did before. I'm going to bring this back into the whole. So simultaneously, while this is happening, there is this great bubble of awareness coming up and I keep seeing bubbles coming up from the earth. And as these bubbles come up, they hold inside of them, let's say it's a bubble coming up from a volcano, it holds sulfur, and that then pops, it expands. All of the stuff that was held inside of that bubble is then released. And this is what I'm seeing happening to us in our physical form. This has been going on for years, but it's really coming up now. And so all of a sudden, these bubbles are coming up from inside of the earth energetically, because the earth holds memories and codes, just like our body does. And let me just briefly, if you haven't watched this video before, I'm going to use cranial sacral as an explanation. If you've ever had cranial sacral work done, they talk about energy cysts. When an injury happens, and let's say you fall and you hit your elbow, the energy goes up the arm, and maybe it gets stuck in the shoulder, maybe it gets stuck in the ring finger, maybe it gets stuck in the rib cage once that impact was felt. So now we go years later and our elbow has healed, but we're still having feelings in our shoulder. And simultaneously, when we fell, perhaps we fell because we lost our balance. And now we have this fear around riding a bicycle. And this could have happened when we were a kid. This is this is in our body. It's held there. It's like an impact zone. So now we go and have cranial sacral done or energy work. And all of a sudden that bubble is popped. And that energy that was stuck in the shoulder can then move out of where and just be released where it needs to go. It can move on and be composted and recycled into something else. So since energy never dies, what we may have perceived as bad or negative is just energy. And so now it gives us the opportunity to heal, and that energy cyst that was then moved or popped or expanded or dissolved is now space, where before it was a coagulation of something was stuck. Now there's space there, and we can allow the body to start coming into a more clearer. That space, that cyst was a distortion in the field, right? It created a blockage that the energy had to move around and reorganize itself in order to balance that blockage, one might say. So it had to make adjustments. So we are making adjustments because all of those things are coming up to the surface. Now, this is also going on within the earth, and also I would say in our cosmos. And everything works together. So while this is happening, it can then pull up a memory of that incident. And I'm going to go multidimensional for a moment. So let's say the bicycle. We all of a sudden feel unstable on our feet. We feel sad and we're not sure why. We had this flashback of being on a bicycle as a kid. And now it brings with it the branches of that timeline. So perhaps our father or mother yelled at us for not paying attention and called us stupid. Now that's connected to that particular memory. So now it's bringing up feelings of insecurity and self-doubt. And then maybe we feel frustrated with our mother or father and don't really remember, don't really know why. So the more conscious we are, aware we are of these things, the easier it is for us to organize and feel into these feelings, memories, thoughts, patterns, to then allow them to integrate a little bit faster. However, there's a lot of people out there who aren't conscious of this and who are unaware that that's what's happening. So then this happens and it creates more feelings of this, and they're not sure what to do with it. They're not sure why it's happening. And so from another perspective, a multidimensional perspective, this could be happening with past lives. It's held within our cellular memory or our DNA. And now we all of a sudden have these weather patterns that are changing. And we remember we're having nightmares about earthquakes or tidal waves or whatever it might be. So then we feel more fear because we're not sure why. I'm afraid of water, I'm afraid of this, or I'm afraid of that. That can be heightened right now. and so on and so on and so forth. Everything's connected. This is all happening at a much bigger, from my perspective, higher rate. Everything's bubble, 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 bubble. I see life in bubbles anyways. So what do we do about this? What I've been shown over and over again is this is all happening for a reason. There are things where there can be feelings of overwhelm, where we may be unable to process this, and there will be certain people who choose not to, or they are unable to process it, and they instead allow all of the bubbles that are coming up that may manifest in disease, and that may be their time to move on, so that they can, from one perspective, move on, literally, to another realm of healing, or to another lifetime, or to another energy realm where they can then be in the space of peace, love, joy, or harmony, or perhaps learn other things that they were unable to learn in this lifetime because of the energies weren't conducive to it, or so on and so forth. We could say it's because of choice. There's so many reasons we could say that people are choosing to, or from another perspective, not choosing to, and that's another video, go into a different state of being, which may mean they leave their physical form. And this can be emotional for a lot of us too, because we're watching people who are just leaving, going away, and that can be emotionally sad for many of us. So that's another component. It creates a feeling of there's so many different words that are coming in. It can create a feeling of impermanence. From one perspective, that feeling of impermanence can create more fear. But from another perspective, that can also light a fire under other people's behinds to do what they want to do that would make them feel more alive and happy and complete, to be kinder to their siblings or human brothers and sisters, to be more compassionate, recognizing that everybody's going through things that are not necessarily easy to deal with. So the more we can stay in a place of compassion, and the more we can feel that everybody's going through something, yet at the same time, it's so powerful right now for us to be able to process our emotions from as, again, compassionate as a space. This has a ripple effect on everything and everybody. And so as we allow ourselves to feel that it's okay to feel, as we allow ourselves to not be overwhelmed by these emotions that are coming up, the less we create this ripple of overwhelm. And the answers are, keep it simple. Take your shoes off. We are electrical beings. Get barefoot, get on the grass. The less we can, we've got technology. It's part of our reality. I'm using technology to communicate with anyone wishing to share in this energy that I'm expressing through. We all have our phones and our computers and our cars and our Bluetooths and our speakers and 5G and all of that. So we are being called to counterwave that, to be a part of it, yet not be completely overwhelmed by it, because what I'm hearing is it dislocates us. It causes a dislocation, a disharmony. It causes us to change our own, circumferometry, I'm hearing. So that's a kind of a portmanteau, a combination of words. It's an interference in our radiance, in our radius, in our circle, in our light, our circumference. We are being called to make the adjustments that are necessary in order to counter all of this, while simultaneously processing and integrating the emotions that are coming up. So getting grounded is really important right now. Drinking more water, avoiding plastic, avoiding over-toxifying our system and our body so that it can make the appropriate adjustments as quickly as it can, because we've got more energy coming in from the sun. And I would just venture for a moment, there's a lot of people who are really tuning into cataclysmic timelines. And what I've been shown is we are creating our reality. So it's not that we ignore that as a potential, and it's not that we don't prepare ourselves for emergencies that may come up, such as an earthquake or a flood or a tornado or a storm. If we live in that region, or it's becoming more coming to us, we can counter that by doing our due diligence and creating a little sense of stability that allows us to then feel better about our situation. Yet if that's all we're focusing on, that's creating a ripple effect. And that is essentially creating a sense of dread and fear in our bodies that then signals out to our environment, fear, dread, etc., etc. We only know what we know. So what's it Cryon says? You don't know what you don't know, right? Lee Carroll channels Cryon. I used to listen to him quite a bit when I was younger. And he probably still has incredibly valuable information that I haven't even tuned into. So if you haven't listened to him, you might enjoy it. But essentially, we think we have an idea of the potentials that are in our reality that are unfolding for us. But in reality, it's so much bigger than that. So why would we limit ourselves to a belief or believing in destruction when we could essentially tune that to a different station, that we could change our station, our location, going into flow, here we go. We could essentially tune into a higher placement that allows us to then create in a new place, from a new place, that allows us to continually restructure our structure in a living, as a living organism, in a living, I'm hearing orgasmic, play on words, organ, organization, orgasmic, right? What is that? It's bliss, it's creation, it's expansion, it's communication with our environment. If we can begin to see those potentials, but not allow those potentials to bring us down, literally, we can then create from a new sound. Instead of creating from a sound of fear, which resonates at this frequency, whoa, that's not the frequency, I'm just giving an example. Instead, we twist it slightly and we reorganize it and merge our sound with that. We integrate that sound of fear and we bring it into utilizing it for growth and expansion. It can actually catapult us into, well, that's not how I want my reality to look. So what do I need to do to shift that? Well, get grounded, get into the heart, do something nice for someone down the street, be kind, grow a garden. When someone asks you how you're doing, we don't have to energy vomit on them that our life is falling apart and the world is falling apart. Instead, we could be honest and say, you know, I'm having a rough day, but here's some things I'm really excited about. Or better spoken, if we are having a rough day, recognizing that the person asking us how we're doing might be having a rough day too. So it's about us communicating in a different way and allowing ourselves to be authentic, to come across as how we really are, but recognizing that if we're fearful or we are in a negative place, that's not really how we are all the time, right? That is really just how we are in that moment. And it may just be that one interaction with someone else who gives us a hug or brings us flowers, or perhaps we're having a rough day, but we bring someone else flowers. Those little interactions that seem so minuscule are really important, especially right now, because we don't necessarily realize how big of an impact that can have on that one person who then makes a decision that they may not have made before that interaction, because you chose to give them a smile. You chose to share with them a positive story. You chose to help them see perhaps that there are good things happening. And I'm also being called to share, this also has to do with us trying to get people to wake up. I hear this a lot. Well, I wish people would wake up. Well, that's a whole other video. This is how we get people to wake up. This is part of it. It isn't necessarily going and explaining what's happening in the political realm that they may not know about. Because if they're in a place of fear, and then we go and tell them what's going on, even though we may think it's coming from a good place, because we may understand that there are things going on that are positive, they may not see it the same way. They may not be able to see it from that same perspective. Therefore, they may interpret the information that we are giving to them in a very different light than how we interpret that information. Therefore, what I'm being called to share is less information about what's happening here, what's happening there, what's unfolding, and instead more energetic compassion and compression, which is the heart frequency. We don't have to explain a story to someone. We can be operating from our higher levels, and people will come to us and then ask. And that's again another video, because there's so many different layers. But when someone's sad, they don't necessarily need to hear why it is that they're sad, or why it is that they shouldn't be sad or in fear or whatever it might be. Instead, we come to them and we share space. We offer food. We give a hug. We tell them how beautiful their hair looks today. Something that's true, that gives them a slight variation in their frequency that would trickle down, and perhaps later down the road, they have an aha because of these added kindness, kind gestures. They see something, now they're here versus here. They've raised that frequency a bit. So now when they see that story, they're able to interpret it from a completely different way. And that's just one layer. I'm going into so many other layers. So that's my little energy update. I guess I'll do an inflow video perhaps later. So in a nutshell, I'm just going to recap briefly. Everybody is going through their experience in a very different way. We all live in bubbles, and what's bubbling up from underneath the earth carries with it memories of other lifetimes. All of us have had other lifetimes, or most of us have. How I've experienced that lifetime will be completely different than someone else who's experienced perhaps even the same timeline, that same lifetime. And we're each being called to allow those individual ahas to expel energy that has been stuck within the reality that we are all connected into. And therefore, how we interpret, how we share, how we feel is all going to be unique to us. And so the more we can see one another as a unique representation of experience, the more value we have in our own compassion for each other. That doesn't mean that we're going to necessarily be able to be compassionate and in a place of full love for our brothers and sisters in every moment of every day, because there are a lot of people who are in their bubble, and not necessarily in a positive way. But there are those of us who can see that, who can recognize that, who then are given an opportunity to essentially shift reality just by us maintaining our own, staying in our lane. Yet, by doing that, it branches out into all of the other lanes in a very organized way rather than this chaotic expression that has been kind of pushed into us into this moment. And by the way, I could go into so many different layers here because this is just the tip of the iceberg, right? The multidimensional iceberg. We aren't necessarily seeing everything that's under the water. Literally. That's a whole other video too. All right, in love and light, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. And I have more to share. I have a lot of information. I'll just end on this note. A lot of information coming in from my guidance team about AI, because that's been a subject that's been really kind of a hot topic. A lot of information coming in also about communication and the changes that are happening on in our bodies. And that's where I'm being called to kind of play with in a positive way, because we are intertwining with these different realities and timelines that maybe some of us don't want to interact with, yet here they are. So how can we interact with them in a more expansive way without bringing our own energy down? And it's going to happen. We're going to have those moments, but the more consistent we can be and not chaotic, then that makes it easier for us to hold that frequency. So I just want to remind everybody that if you're having a bad day and that frequency drops, we're not, don't be hard on ourselves. It's going to happen. But if that's what's happening every day, that's when we're called to get back in the game of what game do we want to play? What would make us feel better that would have a positive impact on our bodies, a positive impact on the world around us, and not fall victim to this victim program or the programming that has been injected into our reality. For we are not programmable. If we can find that consistency, that program doesn't fit and it doesn't hold. So we'll get to that in another video. In love and light, guys. Namaste.